Do you ever feel if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself, but even then it's not quite good enough? Or maybe you're a workaholic and it never feels like you've done enough. How do you feel if it takes you a long time to learn something? What about if you need to ask somebody for help to get something done? And how much information do you need, or what kind of skill set do you feel like you need to have before you feel ready to take your gifts into the world? In other words, is it ever enough? Do you ever feel good enough? Hi, this is Sara Russell. I'm a relationship coach, dancer, and Taoist. In every episode, I'll be talking about psychedelics, well-being, or the human experience, and this one is on 5 types of imposter syndrome. You know when you go out to dinner with a family member, and they love you, but they make some kind of comment like, if you just put on a little bit of makeup, or if you just trimmed or shaved your beard, or if you just lost a few pounds, you'd be so good looking. And it's this idea that if you just put in a little bit more effort, you'd be able to pass as presentable in some way. That's imposter syndrome. It's this idea that if you just worked a little bit harder, you'd be able to pass as presentable, you'd be able to mask as good enough in some way if you just tried a little bit harder. It's this feeling of being a fraud, of struggling with an internal sense of lack of capacity or lack of competency, and that you're tricking people into believing you're more worthwhile than you are, and then contending with all the guilt you feel and all the effort you have to put in order to keep that fraud up, in order to keep that act up. So it's a way that we move through the world of trying to keep others from recognizing our true shortcomings and our true failures so that we can continue to pretend like we belong. Now, this is exhausting and a recipe for burnout. I want to be really clear that when I'm talking about imposter syndrome, it is very harmful to characterize this as purely a psychological issue that is the responsibility of an individual. Toxic cultural messaging tells us all kinds of ways that we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're less than in some way, and puts us into this hierarchical competition with each other constantly as a way to try to prove our worth, try to prove our value. And those messages are passed down to us from a very young age. So we're internalizing this cultural indoctrination before we're even aware that this is happening, right? Before we have the capacity to really be discerning. It's when we're in these very little bodies, these young bodies. And then by the time we're adults, we've internalized these messages so completely that we're not necessarily tracking where they're coming from anymore. They've become beliefs and they've become behaviors and they've become habits that now we just think are our shortcomings, our failures, rather than realizing it's because it's coming from an outside culture that's trying to make us feel less than in some way. You all know I have this chip on my shoulder about fear and consumption. If culture can tell you there's something wrong with you, that means they can also sell you a solution to your problems, which keeps, the rat wheel turning, the rat race going. And this is probably the various forms of imposter syndrome are likely going to sound familiar to you because up to 70% of us are going to experience imposter syndrome at some point in our lives. And as Dan Siegel says, it's helpful to name it to tame it. So even recognizing that feelings of less than or not enoughness or needing to earn your belonging come from external messaging rather than an internal shortcoming can be really helpful for how you choose to engage with these messages. Do you want to continue to believe them? Do you want to continue to organize your life around them? Or do you actually want to make a change and shift and come from your own values and your own standards instead? And part of the way that you can do that is by recognizing that imposter syndrome isn't a one-size-fits-all. So we're not going to all experience imposter syndrome in the same way, even though so many of us are going to experience some incarnation of it at some point in our lives. So Dr. Valerie Young has come up with 5 subtypes of imposter syndrome, and see if you recognize yourselves in any of these descriptions, because once you catch yourself in one of these modes, you can actually then redirect your behavior, redirect your intention and energy, and maybe make a different choice. So the first of the subtypes of imposter syndrome is the perfectionist, and this idea is that you have very high goals, sometimes unattainable, unachievable goals, a standard for yourself that you aren't actually able to meet. And it's the idea that nothing's ever good enough. So there's this feeling of being unsatisfiable. And part of the reason you're unsatisfiable is because we have this tremendous human potential, right? We can grow, we can evolve, we can change, we can strive, we can learn. And so if you're like me, the Taoist in me believes that we have this limitless potential, that humans are constantly breaking down barriers and proving things that we thought we weren't capable of are actually achievable. This is happening all the time across all different fields. So it's no wonder that sometimes we go, oh, wow, I just could have done that so much better. Especially after we've learned something or gone through something in some way, right? We learn so much through the process of doing, through the process of experiencing something, that often at the end of it, we're like, oh, if only I had known, I could have done this so much better. Or the next time I do this, I can do this so much better. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do something better, unless you're constantly making yourself miserable because nothing's ever good enough. And so there's an antidote to all of these imposter syndromes. And the antidote to being a perfectionist is to acknowledge your work, to show your work, and to accept the unacceptable, that you are unlikely to produce something flawless on the first time every time you're trying to do something. And to really start sinking into what is a feeling of good enough, what would be satisfying, even if it's not meeting your full potential. Like there can be two different ranges here. Like what's the potential of something you could be accomplishing? You can hold that and hold it lightly, but also being able to rest in a sense of satisfaction sometimes. The second type of imposter syndrome, the subtype of imposter syndrome, is the superhuman. And this is the idea that you need to be harder, better, faster, stronger, always, all the time. So you stay late at work. You give up your weekends and your free time. You sacrifice your personal relationships in order to do more at work. And part of the hook with the superhuman subtype is that you get really attached to the validation you get from people acknowledging that you're working hard rather than the validation you would get from the work itself. So the antidote to being a superhuman is to make sure you aren't overextending yourself. So this means tracking your wants, tracking your capacity, tracking your energy levels, and seeing what it is you actually want to do rather than what you feel you have to do, otherwise you're not good enough. The third subtype of imposter syndrome is the natural genius. And these are the people that feel like their worth is determined based on how quickly they can pick something up, whether or not they can do something right the first time, and how easy it is for them. And natural geniuses tend to get frustrated if they need to work hard or if they struggle at something for a while. They get frustrated, they get impatient, and they start to shame spiral and they start to feel like, I'm just not good at that. That's just not my thing. And then they put it down rather than putting in the effort in to grit through a little bit. And they've done studies around this with kids where if you tell young children when they accomplish something, oh, you're so smart, then they tend to start associating their intelligence with their ability to easily and quickly pick something up, which means that if they struggle with something, they start to feel stupid, which means they don't want to do it anymore. They lose motivation, and so then they stop trying. Now, this is contrasted with if you tell a young child, you worked so hard, or I really appreciate the effort you put into this. And this is a way to really contextualize the fact that sometimes things take a while, or sometimes you need to work, or you're going to make mistakes, or things are going to be messy sometimes. And so that teaches kids a particular kind of resilience where they know they might actually need to try. Although again, like not try to the point of exhaustion or try to the point of shame, but just be willing to be in the discomfort of it sometimes in order to learn something. So the antidote to this is rather than writing something off if you're not good at it automatically, set yourself small goals where you allow yourselves to struggle a little bit, a reasonable amount, so you recognize that just because you don't get something right away doesn't mean you're a failure or you're stupid or you're not good enough in some way. Sometimes we just need to have some compassion for the learning process. The fourth type of imposter syndrome is the soloist. And thank you, toxic individualism in the culture that teaches us we need to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. This is the kind of hyper individualism that makes you feel weak or a failure if you need to ask for help for something. And soloists tend to avoid asking for help, but if they do ask for help, it tends to be centered around the project rather than around the person. So they'll say, oh, I need help with this project. The project needs help in this way, rather than me as the person needs help in this way, as a way to try to shield themselves from feelings of imperfection or not being enough in some way. So the antidote to this is to recognize, sure, you may be able to grit through. You may be able to struggle and sweat and exhaust yourself to some level of success, completion. But what would you rather be doing with that energy? With all of this purpose and all of this passion that so many of us have, we have to be strategic with our use of energy. And so you could actually potentially be getting more done or be more satisfied with what you're getting done if you call in your collective for some community care. The fifth subtype of imposter syndrome is the expert. And experts believe that how much and what they know and what they can do determines whether or not they're worthwhile. And so it's this idea that you need to go back to school. You need to get another credential. You need to get another certification. You need to read one more book. And again, as a lifelong learner, I am absolutely committed to curiosity. And so again, humans have this incredible potential to grow and to learn and to expand. And that curiosity is such a beautiful thing. The problem is when it starts restricting you from sharing your gifts with the world. When you feel like it's never enough, when you feel like you have to keep collecting things, but then you never actually use the tools that you're learning. So the antidote to this is, rather than hoarding your knowledge, share what you know with the world. And that might be as simple as telling a friend of yours what you know, demonstrating your skill in some way, rather than never feeling like it's ready, always feeling like you need to have this experience of perfection, or this performance of perfection in order for your skill set to be worthwhile or valuable to somebody. I remember when I was first training to be a coach, and I was, I'm so concerned with not wanting to do harm to people, right? So I guide people through their lives. I offer them advice. I offer them my skill set and the tools that I've learned. But I want to make sure that I'm never directing somebody's life so much that I'm pulling them in a direction that doesn't actually work for them. I deeply believe that people are the experts of their own lives. So when I was, a new baby coach, when I was first learning how to do this, I was really worried that I was going to give somebody some advice that wasn't going to be helpful for them, or would direct them in a way that wasn't appropriate for them. So I was talking to my coach who was supervising me through this process. And she said, Sarah, do you believe that what you're offering is better than nothing? Because the idea is that if I wasn't talking to people, they wouldn't have any information, right? And I was like, yeah, I can agree that what I'm offering is better than nothing. And she's like, okay, so you're offering something that's better than nothing. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm offering something, and then people can do with it what they will. So this is the antidote to feeling like you need to be the expert, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be a master. You can offer your information up as a gift, and then people can take what they need and leave the rest. Regardless of what kind of imposter syndrome you have, the real antidote to all of this is to make sure you're not holding yourself to a toxic cultural standard that's not serving you, that's draining your energy by making you feel less than, which is actually keeping you from fulfilling your true purpose in the world. So my wish for you is that you can find your own magic tricks, hacks, subversions, alternative, customized commitments where you can actually create a life of satisfaction based on your standards. So be the kind of person you want to be on your terms, not a toxic cultural standard, not status quo, don't worry about being basic. Like don't be trying to fit in, and like be the most basic version of yourself you can, because that way you can fit into some kind of generalized status quo. Be you. You're amazing. You're the only one that can move through the world the way that you do, because like nobody else is in your body. Nobody else has had your experiences. Nobody else has your interpretations. You may have similarities with people, but like trust how special you are in this wide world, and really, really commit to trusting yourself. Here's a poem by Nayira Waheed to help get you there. As you are, says the universe. After, you answer. As you are, says the universe. Before, you answer. As you are, says the universe. When, you answer. As you are, says the universe. How, you answer. As you are, says the universe. Why, you answer. Because you are happening right now, right at this moment, and your happening is beautiful. The thing that both keeps me alive and brings me to my knees. You don't even know how breathtaking you are, as you are, says the universe through tears. As you are the prayer. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. That is really helpful for allowing me to continue creating all of this content for you. I love talking with you all. And go ahead and check out trendswithbenefits.com. I have written content there. My co-host Kyle has written work there. So do a bunch of other amazing writers. You can also sign up for our newsletter and get a weekly dose of all this yummy content we're creating to try to make your life a little easier, a little bit brighter, a little bit more fun. And if you have any relationship questions you'd like me to answer on the air, go ahead and send me a short voice memo describing what it is you need some help with. And you can make this as anonymous as you want. We will play your voice on air, but you don't have to name yourself. You can give a stage name, code name, ped name, spy name, whatever it happens to be. But go ahead and let me know what you need support with and email that to podcast@mudwtr.com. And what's your favorite way of drinking mud water? Currently, I'm obsessed with a new recipe that was released, the Muddy Submarine, because it means I get to drink something blue every day, which is fabulous for people like me who like to pretend we're unicorns on the regular. What's your favorite way to drink mud water? You can go ahead and send a voice memo in about that to podcast@mudwtr.com. And if we play your recipe, your particular way of drinking it on the air, we will ship you a free mud water mug. So be sure to include your email address in that email as well. For all of you listening, for all of you doing the hard work of loving yourselves, I hope you find some ease. I hope you find your preferences. I hope you find your pleasure. Take care.